In this episode of DU Nation, we headed to Galliano, Louisiana to meet with Jett Brunet at his home and give you an inside look at his workshop, carving methods, and his collection of items from throughout waterfowling history. Jett is the son of world champion carver Tan Brunet. Jett grew up watching his father carve and picked it up at a very young age. He has won world champion titles in decoy carving and interpretive sculptures, and he's maintained a relationship with Ducks Unlimited, carving the exclusive decoy of the year for 24 years to raise money for conservation.
This is my carving shop. I designed it to where it's convenient for me to have a painting station, a carving station, and have the windows and doors set up where I get a lot of natural light in to work from, but no direct light. So I've learned through the years of carving to control the color of light, the direction of light, to create a nice soft balance for when I'm carving and painting. No deep hard shadows. And I set it up where most of the time I like to let the wind come through, so I've got doors on each end and I can let the north wind or south wind blow through. So years of carving in different shops with my dad, and in my old shop from a few years ago, I learned the best way to feel at ease, get the right look I want, the right feeling. And this is elevated on about 17 feet above sea level, and just, it has a good feeling. So when you sit down and you want to create, man, you want your mind to flow, and you just want to feel nice and comfortable. And there's a few things in here that are special to me. There's a picture of me and my dad along the Gulf of Mexico on a beach, fishing when I was about 3 years old. And I keep it with me. It's sitting there, and I think about it every once in a while. Me and my son, Doug hunting, my son Jett, dug hunting about 15 years ago. There's a photo of Jude, my brother, my dad, my son Jett, and myself carving in my dad's shop, where I spent probably 20 years of the beginning of my carving career carving with my dad. I lived in a house right behind my dad's house, so we carved in that shop there. So I slowly developed the best design to work in, that I can control the temperature, the light, the comfort zone, and just let the art flow through me. And I've got study skins to work from. I spend a lot of time researching before I start carving on a duck. I spend hours studying photos and videos, and get as technical as I can to get to the end result of a final product. But I always start back at the beginning, the way my dad taught me how to carve, which was using Tupelo, tree that grows in the swamps next to the cypress trees, and a big beautiful bulb at the bottom. I mean, the tree straight bulbs out at the bottom right before it hits the water. And that 4 feet of area right at the water line is the best, softest, nicest wood to carve from. Tupelo, they call it Tupelo gum. It's not a gum tree, but Tupelo, and it's this beautiful light, creamy colored wood, virtually grainless, so you can carve it without it chipping or flaking, and it's very buoyant, very light to carve decoys to hunt with. And it's fortunate we're so fortunate having an abundance of it all around the swamps where we live. And I'll show you a little bit of how we'll get started on a new carving. I'll sketch out a pattern of whatever particular bird I'm working on. This is going to be a black duck. And I sketches just the design I want, the shape I want, the size I want, put it on paper. And then from paper I trace and make a pattern. Put it on a square block of Tupelo. And as I did, the way I learned from my dad, rather starting with power tools, he would always start carving a decoy with the hatchet, as did the duck carvers from the early days in the early 1900s, where my dad learned from. They would use a hatchet, which is the technique I still use today. And there it is. So it's so much fun to cut into a nice, fresh, new piece of Tupelo. And rather than hearing the loud sound of power tools and making dust everywhere, just slowly scope at this piece of Tupelo. And once you get it going, you can pick up a nice little rhythm of the sound even. and you can learn how to control it to where you're just taking the amount of wood you want off in any particular area. This reminds me of watching my dad as a young boy, because I'm focusing right where the blade's hitting, and I'm hearing that little chopping sound. And I can picture sitting by my dad and watching him do this, you know. Isn't that cool? And I can get so fine with little bitty chips. And when I'm getting started, man, I can take big chunks off like this, you know. And at some point, once the heavy work's done with the hatchet, you get a decoy roughly into this stage of development. Start putting actual feathers on, and that's when you get a real sharp knife, sharp as a razor, and just start taking nice chips. And that Tupelo is just so nice, so soft, such a little grain. I can get it so fine with this knife you almost don't need sandpaper when you're getting ready to put final texture on a bird. I'm just slicing.
How do you know when you got the body exactly where you want it?
I have precise measurements of, you know, I study. This is a harlequin duck. I've never made a harlequin in my life, so I had to study even more to get, you know, ballpark measurements of length, width, thickness, bill size, and then putting it all on paper, you get to where, okay, this will be about the, you know, the actual size of a harlequin. I typically like to glorify whatever species I'm working on. So it'll likely be the largest harlequin you've ever seen, right? And just make it a little bold, a little beautiful, a little something extra than just the average duck you see. Once I get it going, I take precise measurements from my pattern onto the block of wood using different measurement techniques, calipers and such, you know. So I can look down at my pattern and say, okay, it's got to be exactly that wide, and carve down till I get the specific shape. Certain like the width of a duck can fluctuate depending on if he's got his feathers tied in or very loose, but some things don't change, like the exact size of the bill, the exact length of the primaries, the exact length of the tail feathers. So using those measurements, which I know are accurate, I can kind of fit in the size and shape of the body and keep it relative to the precise measurements. And then when you put it all together, you've got a bird that very well represents that particular species. But the sculpting is the most fun for me. Once I get past this stage, I'll start carving into each individual feather, and then wood burning and painting. And there's many hours spent doing that. But what's natural to me is sculpting. It's what I love to do most. And so at the stage that this bird's in right now is my most enjoyment. Like, I'll sit here and listen to some Jimmy Buffett or Toby Keith and just spend the afternoon just chipping away and just creating art with my hands like I learned from my dad. I'm very lucky to be able to do this. Pieces I've collected since I'm maybe 10 years old. Watching my dad carve and collect when I was a kid, and he loved antique decoys. This was some that he carved when he was a teenager to hunt over, and before plastic decoys, or before you could afford plastic decoys. You're a Cajun and living here on the bayou, and you didn't shoot ducks for fun. You shot ducks to eat, you know. And so a lot of the locals, hunters, carved their own decoys. You get cypress root that would flow down from the Mississippi River and wash up on the beaches. And it was very light, very soft, floated very good, easy to carve. So as it progressed, less and less hunters carved decoys because plastics came out, and the better decoy carvers, like the Vizier family of carvers And my dad and a few other outstanding carvers, well, they would sell their decoys for pennies. You know, so cheap back, I'm talking the early 50s, late 40s, stuff like that. And once plastic came out and the wooden decoys became obsolete, a great artist like my dad kept doing them and made them a little more and more decorative. And to the point of where now they're highly realistic. The better artists in the world do these realistic decoys, like you got to touch them to believe they're not feathers. But what my dad did, when hunters started disregarding the wooden decoys to buy the plastics, he loved the art form so much that he'd go out and purchase working decoys. Without a lot of money, he just loved it so much. And what he'd do is guys were actually throwing them and burning them, the wooden ones, because now they had plastic ones they could buy at a department store. My dad would buy rigs of plastic decoys and trade with the guys. Please don't throw it away. Please don't burn it. So now, 50 or 80 years later, these guys got worthless plastic decoys, and my dad has all these treasures. And now many people realize the value of one of the true American art forms is these beautiful antique old wooden decoys. My dad passed away about 3 years ago and left me a third of his collection. So all of a sudden now I've got this, collection of over 200 decoys, and sort of just the most precise ones I want. Not just any type of decoys, but birds that came from carvers that really meant a lot to me. The way I became a carver as I am now, it all started with the Vizier family of carvers from Cheniere, Louisiana, way below New Orleans, down on the coast, little island called Grand Isle, and right across the pass from it was this little town called Cheniere, which means Oak Ridge. Well, Beauregard Vizier was a carver in the late 1800s, and this is one of his decoys. This bird was carved somewhere probably 1890 or so, and he had two sons, Cadiz and Ode. So he taught his two sons how to carve. After, these bad storms out along the Gulf Coast hit, destroyed many birds. Many decoys were lost from these storms, and a few survived of Beauregard. This is one, I have three of them. This is like my favorite decoy here, invaluable. Well, his two sons, Cadiz and Ode, they became very prolific carvers and made a living hunting, selling live ducks, and selling their decoys. Selling live ducks, selling market ducks. Well, Ode had a son called Jimmy Vizier, okay? My dad's best friend and cousin. So Beauregard taught Cadiz and Ode how to carve. They taught Jimmy Vizier how to carve. Jimmy Vizier taught my dad how to carve. My dad taught me how to carve. So that's why this work up here is so special to me. The Vizier family of carvers is where my dad was the first Brunet to carve, but he learned from his cousins, relatives, and these fabulous artists. So I'm very fortunate that way that I didn't start all this. I'm just sort of finishing it, This little dugout pirogue was made out of cypress fruit from my dad when he was a teenager, when he was about 12 years old. And it's filled with only Vizier decoys, anywhere from the early 1900s to, I'd say, maybe the mid-50s, mostly Cadiz Vizier. He was the most prolific. And this little dugout pirogue was made, like I said, made from my dad when he was about 12 years old. And I took it over when I was about 12 years old and started using it to play and hunt with. He even made me this really small young boy's push bowl. So I have the push bowl he used, and he made me this small boy's push bowl. And it's a very small pirogue. It's made actually for a child, And there's a lot of these antique decoys. Through the years get broken, no heads, just the bodies. And to me, still the body of a Vizier decoy or a Jett Brunet decoy is still so valuable. So I did put a little collection in an old oyster basket of just the birds with no heads and sort of featured the tail end of the birds. And I put a couple of nutria and muskrat skinners and a couple of traps just to bring me back to the old days of carving and hunting and fishing on Bayou Lafourche. And then going from what I learned, what these guys did, strictly as a tool, okay, to what we've become. These are two of my finest works of art here. Back about 24 years ago, I did this last competition, decorative decoy, this Gadwall Drake. It won Best of Show at the World Championship. in the master's class and was also judged the People's Choice Award. And that was the year 2000. And that's when I decided I'm done with decorative decoy competition and and started doing these originals for reproduction for Ducks Unlimited. So it's 24 years later now, and I've had a carving in the package, in the national package every year for 24 years with Ducks Unlimited, and I'm very, very proud of that. I started carving miniatures. I'm 9 years old, little bitty knives, and couldn't handle a big bird. So I guess about 6 years later, I did this. My first decoy out of cypress root, a hen green winged teal. And so I was 13 years old when I did my first full size. And it's kind of crude, kind of rough, and technically not completely finished. But that's where I began. And from that point on, still making miniatures, but I basically jumped to the full size birds and with all the feathering. And at that point, my dad was becoming a world champion, the best carver in the world doing these highly decoratives. And that's what you needed to compete and win championships. You know, the art form went from those crude hunting birds to these highly detailed decoratives, and that's how they would judge the most realistic, rendering of a bird you can possibly do. And this is a green winged teal here that I did about 40 years later. So when you compare the two of where I began to where I ended up, it's pretty stark.
Man, it's amazing.
So this is a pintail drake that was decoy of the year, I believe, 7 years ago. And I just recently completed it, like I said, a few days ago, and put the final touches on it and I've got so many birds that I've accumulated over the years, doing at least 2 a year for Ducks Unlimited, at the stage of ready to paint, all the carving, all the texturing, even a thin layer of paint over the original to go into the process of reproductions. And now I'm going to start a little bit at a time, finishing them off and selling them, Well, my whole life carving decoys, from the earliest hunting type birds to the highly detailed decoratives. Made my career, won my first 2 world championships as a young man, 21 years old, still the youngest world champion ever to win the world pairs. And as I progressed and made a living doing these highly decorative birds, I always felt that my natural talent was sculpting. As a boy, I could look in a block of wood and see that decoy. I could just see it in there, And I said, like my dad, you take a block of wood, and when you want to carve a decoy, you take a block of wood and remove everything that doesn't look like a duck, and you're left with it. So it's just the way I see things. And what I had to learn to become a champion, you had to learn how to wood burn and detail and paint precision, because you were judged on the most highly realistic duck you can make. And I did that and got to the top of the art form and stayed there for many, many years. But once I got away from the competition of decorative decoys, I went back to what's natural to me, which is sculpting. So there's a category at the World Championship called Interpretive Wood Sculpture. And it can be anything you think of. It can be stylized, it can be, the only criteria is that it has to have some type of foul in the carving. So I started doing these interpretive pieces that come way more natural to me, and I'm not spending months putting highly detailed texture and paint jobs and all. And to me, it's just as good, if not a greater piece of art, because I'm bringing in more composition and technical designs and all these things that make for a good piece of art. So 30 years after my first world title, I entered the interpretive wood sculpture. And this is the piece right here. I call it Musical Guest. I had a dream one night that a songbird flew into my open window and landed on my piano. I actually don't have a piano, but I woke up the next morning thinking, man, that's a work of art in there. So there's got to be something, So I developed, a couple of years later, I developed this composition where, rather than trying to depict the window, I just hinted at a curtain that would have been hanging in the window, just blowing on the edge of this piano, which would have indicated the window's open. And I've got this little chickadee just sitting on the piano keys with his foot slightly depressing one of the keys. And I titled it Musical Guest. and it was judged best in world championship 30 years after my first title. So that was pretty cool. I changed complete categories and won another title in a totally different way of creating art. And having won my last 3 championships in a row, 5 overall, which ties my dad's record, and I felt, well, that's the time to drop the microphone and ride off into the sunset. So my competition days are over, but my carving birds for Ducks Unlimited and carving sculptures from my own satisfaction will go on forever. And I did several, and actually this is probably my finest piece of art, which is just this lifeless mallard that I believe any hunter, I believe that any lover of art can appreciate it as a work of art. But for any duck hunter, they can picture that first big mallard drake that they shot. It's laying over the bow of the boat or the back of a truck, and still where there's still life and blood and feathers, so it's fluffed up, not laying there stiff like it's been sitting there for 2 days, but just still fluffed up right in there, you're just admiring it. And it brings me back. And I titled that piece Life Study, because to me it's like, okay, this bird was sacrificed for someone to eat, and yet the bird itself, the skin itself, inspires me to take a block of wood and bring it to life. Okay, so I thought that was kind of a cool thing, and this is carved from a solid block of wood, and still I believe it's probably my finest work of art of anything I've ever done. As a boy hunting with my dad, right across the protection levee system of our small community in Galliano. From where we live, we just go straight to the canal, jump over the levee, and we hunted right there on a reserve. Hunted ducks with my dad's own decoys. As saltwater intrusion came in over the, years and years and years, the vegetation disappeared, and so the ducks disappeared, as happens. Well, cut to 40 years later, I am carving decoys, originals, to benefit Ducks Unlimited and the whole waterfowl population and the wetlands. So now, all these years later, Ducks Unlimited are making terraces right outside of the levee system where I hunted, okay? So part of the money coming full circle that I helped raise for the wetlands is now, coming to fruition right where I hunted as a little boy and bringing ducks back to the exact spot where I was. So my artwork has come full circle in my eyes, straight back to my backyard. And that's why I think Ducks Unlimited is such a worthwhile organization, that you see the results. It's tangible. It's right there in front of you, And it's just exciting for me and it only hit me maybe a couple of years ago when they started doing the terraces, and I'm like, wait a minute. They're bringing ducks exactly right where I hunted as a boy. And some of it is money I helped, raise for them. So that's pretty cool.